physique. It's like the perfect body. Even your heart friend can't take her eyes off him. I don't think she's making it past today. Besides this guy having a perfect body, he showed the girl something huge that left her impressed and salivating. A giant dungeon crystal weighing around 2 pounds. I know what you were thinking, you dirty-minded prick. The girl is in shock because a crystal of that size and purity can only be obtained in S-rank dungeons or higher. And to this day, only 5 S-rank dungeons have been cleared in the entire country. How could a loser like him have something like that? Oh, are you wondering how a protagonist with such a muscular body is a loser? Then let's go back to the beginning of the story. He was just a crystal scavenger for other hunters in dungeons. In music, other words, he was trash who lived off everyone else's scraps. That's because he awakened as a zeroer powerless music person. So he had zero chance of acquiring any skills. At least he has a friend. That's a big deal. And I mean big. This friend also scavenges scraps with him, which is why she was so happy with that giant stone earlier. But hey, music, tiny little pebble like that was only worth about 30 bucks. So for him, it was just another day as a failure. But things changed when a lawyer arrived saying his father had passed away and left him something. The kid barely remembers his dad. Just another case of a father who went out to buy cigarettes early on, and what he left for his son was a sort of necklace. His friend, upon seeing it, said it was a return stone, but it could only be used inside dungeons to escape. Is it just me, or is this girl getting prettier and prettier? Even the protagonist is getting awkward. I think it's about time he smashes her right now. At home, he was watching TV. The strongest hunter was giving an interview about how his group managed to clear an S-rank dungeon. This guy is rich, handsome, and gay. Meanwhile, the protagonist only has this weird thing left by his father. But when he grips the artifact tightly, his hand begins to glow. It glows so bright he starts to panic. Then, he's teleported to another world, and the system welcomes him. He awakened his mana, which was now circulating through his body. But until then, he was just talentless trash. Suddenly, the system announces that he has achieved the impossible. That's because he entered hell difficulty while having the lowest level of everyone. Because of that, he earned music, the title SSS rank good luck. As compensation for his low level, the effects were boosted. He also took first place in the hell difficulty ranking, earning the title Hell's Music Strongest. He is now the final survivor. Without understanding a thing, he started calling out for someone. I think he's already going crazy. But he was soon distracted by a giant dungeon crystal. However, he didn't know that something was about to get him. Quickly, he started spitting ketchup. He was poisoned and paralyzed. His stamina was being consumed bit by bit. The system recognized it as an enemy attack, and so he died for the first time after 4 minutes in this world to music. Find dust level 1. Oh no. Not understanding, the protagonist questions whether this could be a dream. He is informed that the mission has begun and that he must survive until sunrise. Fearful, he gets up, runs, and says that this situation is horrible. Desperate, Humu says he doesn't know who is making him go through this, but he promises revenge on the person responsible. The screen appears and says he died after only 5 minutes of survival. Kneeling, music, Kong apologizes and begs God again. They inform him that he died, this time surviving for 11 minutes. They inform him that the young man's resistance to poison has increased, as well as his resistance to paralysis. Plan 2 would be to rid himself of the fine dust by inhaling. Once again, the young man dies. After the 14th death, the young man reflects that the time he survived the longest was when he was just breathing. He tries to remember what that kind of thing was called, and if they were breathing techniques concentrated. Hume recalls when he learned he needed to keep his breath lower in his lungs. As a child, the boy had access to these techniques. The man who was teaching says that among all the children he saw, the young man was by far the one with the most potential. Thinking about this, he sits on the ground and tries to concentrate. Once again, he dies, but this time he survived for 1 hour and 41 minutes. After the 28th death, the protagonist feels strange and says his body is lighter. He questions whether his level has increased, but the screen states that the poison has reached a critical point in his body. They assert that he learned the ability for poisonous blood and that because of this he will no longer suffer damage from poison. Startled, the young man asks what just happened. Himu wonders if he gained resistance by breathing fine dust, and that this caused him to have poisonous blood. The young man finds it absurd. Observing the area, he notices there are crystal mosses scattered everywhere, and he says he wishes all of those were real. As if by magic, the screen states that the boy's inventory has been enabled. Reading the instructions, he realizes that those stones on the path were indeed crystal moss. Then he realizes he can do all kinds of things at that moment. Still a bit confused, Kong wonders what the sound he has been hearing for a while is, and that it seems somewhat familiar. The noise increases and causes Himu to panic and run away desperately while being followed by a cloud of mosquitoes. As he tries to shake off the insects, they inform him that the boy's abilities have increased in contrast to his level. Suddenly, many mosquitoes enter the boy's mouth as he screams in desperation. The screen informs that the young man died, and that his survival was 6 hours and 18 minutes. They inform that he poisoned and killed over 100 monsters at once. Seeking answers, Kong asks if those mosquitoes died from sucking his blood, which is now poisonous, but they assert that he contracted an abnormal state and will begin to lose health constantly. Hyunu panics, saying he just came back from death and that this is nonsense. The screen keeps notifying that bacteria have accumulated inside the boy's body and that his health has dropped below 10%. Tired, the young man says the system seems to be having fun on its own. He comes across the ability to dismantle and doesn't understand when he got that. But he reflects that although it is just a normal ability, it served him very well. Sitting on the ground, he observes the environment and notices a mosquito that is quite large. The boy grabs a chair in his hands and says he should test his new ability. After giving the command to dismantle, the chair is separated into several pieces and parts. He thinks that if he gained the ability to dismantle, it means he can obtain a skill by doing something like that. The screen states that he learned the creation ability. Kong celebrates and says he understands how things work. The young man thinks he obtained rare abilities and that he planned to do that later, but will do it at that moment. Humu decides to go make a shelter. With power in hand, the boy thinks he doesn't know how long he can stay trapped in that place, and that he also doesn't know what kinds of opponents he might encounter there. Therefore, if he survives longer, he will need to create some kind of safe space to remain. Kong thinks he should use all the crystal moss he has to create the shelter. Looking at the ground, he notices there is a newspaper there and wonders what is written. Then the screen appears and says that the boy has obtained language, a common power. The boy enjoys thinking that there are all kinds of abilities. He starts reading the newspaper and suddenly comes across the name Jite Li. This information makes the boy question whether there is a connection between the place he is in and where he was before. Still holding the newspaper, he observes the place carefully and thinks that where he was before ended up in ruins. Pensive, Hyoma states that even though he knows this, there is nothing he can do to change it at that moment. Without thinking twice, he says he will do his best and starts dismantling the mosquitoes. Later, Kong says he is tired of dismantling things. He notices that many items have appeared and wonders what he can do with them. Suddenly, a dart appears, leaving Hymu confused. Carefully observing, the man says it looks like a consumable item and seems easy to obtain. Before taking any action, he knows he needs to do some research on that object. Looking again at everything he has obtained, Kong questions whether these are all the materials he possesses. Upon activating production, it explains that he successfully produced a legendary unknown egg. Observing the created egg, Hao is surprised by the size of the object. The system warns that the egg needs to be observed to discover what is inside, and that there is a 50% chance of it being alive or dead. Kong puts the egg inside his shirt, closes his eyes, and becomes thoughtful. Suddenly, a noise catches the boy's attention, and he wonders what it could be. Then he notices the presence of a goblin. Startled, Kong questions why that creature is there. Before he could take any action, the young man realizes that the monster has noticed his presence. Looking at a staircase, the boy knows that is his only way out. But the goblin continues to chase the young man, leaving him anxious. Desperate, he accesses his inventory and tries to fend off the monster with a piece of wood. The two engage in hand-to-hand combat. Kong realizes that the creature is quite fast. The goblin verbalizes something, startling the protagonist, who notices that the monster is speaking again. He accesses the inventory and grabs some darts. Without thinking twice, he throws them at the opponent, but it doesn't cause much damage to the monster, just some bubbles on its arm. The goblin then grabs an axe and cuts its own arm. Confused, Kong questions whether the man's arm ended up that way because his blood was on the dart. While thinking, he realizes that the monster has disappeared. Out of nowhere, he notices the opponent's presence coming from the ceiling of the place. Before he could escape, he falls to the ground and the adversary steps on his back, but he gives up on killing him and walks away, saying that there are still some humans left. They inform that the resistance has fallen below 10% and that the boy will be resurrected according to the advantages of the title, The Last. Kong says that goblins are cursed and promises to get back at them. Still lying on the ground, they announce that the mission is complete. Tired, Huno reflects on what happened and how he feels. The system informs that the young man has completed the mission first night in hell, and the boy celebrates that he succeeded. With that, he receives the silver box as a reward, but is told that it will be upgraded to a gold box. They also inform that the return stone can be used until the start of the next mission. Additionally, the time for the next mission will be 14 days. Hayamu celebrates that he will finally be able to return to his world. Upon opening his eyes, he is surprised by the place where the protagonist is and is astonished. Laughing, music, Kong realizes that he has indeed returned. Shouting, he celebrates that he has returned to his world. Then he grabs the stone he is using as a necklace. He breaks the string and curses his father for leaving such a thing for him. Before he could throw the object far away, he remembers the abilities gained in hell. A person approaches and observes the boy lying on the ground. It is Yumin who calls for her friend. A bit worried, she runs in his direction and states that her friend cannot stay there like that. Startled, music, the young woman asserts that if things go wrong, the boy could end up suffering from mana poisoning. Yu shouts that Hunu must leave that place before the poisoning. While listening to what the girl says, the boy tries to talk to her. The young woman says she has a mana contamination remover. She hands it to her friend and insists he must use it as a precaution while he says it's all right. Completely irritated, Yum shouts that the boy isn't taking this seriously and that he won't be able to regret it after he's dead. After being convinced to use it, Humu takes a shower and upon exiting, he questions the date, being told it's September 11th. The information leaves the protagonist a bit confused. Noticing, Yu asks if something happened and says she worked alone for 2 days since she couldn't contact her friend. Kong wonders if he was out for just 2 days as it felt like he had been absent for years. While thinking, the girl feels embarrassed and asks her friend to control himself. Yum states she will buy whatever the boy needs. After all, he can't stay like that. And he questions her about his other clothes. Pointing to a trash bag, she asserts that there's no way he can wear them since they are contaminated and torn. The young woman leaves the room and asks her colleague to wait quietly. As soon as the woman leaves the room, the boy realizes the system has been activated. A bit confused, he wonders what that is. They explain that it's the gold box he received as a reward for the mission. The system states that the quality of the rewards will increase due to the effect of the title Good Luck. Rancis. Additionally, the protagonist gained the legendary skill of Battle Assistant. The fact that it's a legendary skill catches Hugh and Mo's attention. He asserts that he is sure there are only 7 people in the world with a special skill, and that this means that since he gained the skill, he has become the 8th bearer of the legendary skill. Still a bit confused, the boy questions what a battle assistant is and if it will help him. Soon, Yumin returns with some clothes, but she looks a bit startled by what she sees. She asks what her friend is doing, and he is at a loss for words. Embarrassed, the young woman states she will pretend she didn't see what was happening. Later, the woman says the right thing to do would be to take the boy to the hospital, but he seemed healthy, so she took him to her home. Yu questions if the young man has any powers and why he is working as a collector. Responding, Kong says he hasn't had his power for long. He asks his friend about the research she mentioned doing earlier and asks her to take a look at something for him. Curious, Yu asks what that object is. who shows the crystal moss he picked up and says he isn't sure how much it's worth. The young woman is in shock at what she sees in front of her. There is a kilo of crystal moss in the protagonist's hand. He asserts that since his friend is in the middle of research on the subject, she should know more than he does. But Yu says no way and that it's impossible. While she is perplexed by the crystal, the young woman asks where her friend got that and says it's not easy to find crystal moss that pure, defining the stone as something 5 stars. Haimu questions if his friend said she was a collector because of the research. Stammering, the girl responds, yes. Then the young man clarifies that he has no intention of giving the stone to his friend, but that in exchange, he will tell her how she could get his crystal moss. Kong asks Yu for help selling the precious item. Min says that's ridiculous. And with that purity and size, the boy would need more documents. She says if the stone were smaller, it would be easier to sell, but that's not the problem. Before she could finish, Haimu breaks the stone into 2 pieces. Irritated, the girl starts to hit the boy, but he asks for calm and claims to have another crystal moss even bigger. Upon hearing this, Yu's eyes fill with tears. With a trembling voice, she asks if her friend really has more, and he confirms, asking again for help selling the moss. After her confirmation, he states he has 2 conditions: that no one knows where it came from, and that he is the one selling it. She agrees and says it's better than seeing the crystals being broken in half. Yu continues explaining that they have a purity that can only be obtained in the first dungeon, and she is incredulous that the precious crystals are crushed in her hands. Hunga says he will decide what to do later depending on how well his friend sells the precious product. Then he gets up, takes the clothes from the trash bag, and says he is leaving, but the friend invites him to sleep at her house. The next day, the 2 wake up and Yu states he is going to the meeting point he arranged with the buyer. A week later, the 2 young people appear together, and the blonde girl says her friend doesn't need to go with her, but he insists he will only go in case something happens. However, Yu says it's not as dangerous a trade as he thinks. The protagonist thinks that although he is asking her to do that, many people are about to lose everything in society. They both continue on their way in search of the next client for the moss. They spot the buyer and Haimu says it's a good thing he didn't go alone to the location. Yu approaches and says he came with his partner that day. Kong realizes he had focused on the wrong man. The seller introduces himself as Parkiso and shakes hands with Kan Hanmo. Just from the handshake, the protagonist already knows the client is quite strong and that in the case of an attack, he wouldn't be able to defeat the opponent. The sign warns that the boy's abilities have increased. After examining the moss, the man asks if he needs to deposit the money into the same account as always, and the girl agrees. He leaves the location and says he hopes to meet Kong again. This leaves the protagonist quite confused. Yu says that's strange. After all, the man never greeted her like that. Humu wonders if the man is acting differently than usual and if he could have discovered who unearthed the mosses. Laughing, Yu asks if his friend thought they would be robbed by the buyer. She asks him not to be so downcast since this type of negotiation also happens thoughtfully. She asks her friend to share what other thoughts he has and questions how he feels seeing $1 million entering his account. Far from there, they ask if the negotiation was successful, and Park Waiso says yes, that he obtained all the products available in the market. The man says that if all the mosses are combined, they will be quite large. The other person talking asks how all those mosses ended up randomly in the market. Observing the piece, the boy asks Park what he thinks, and he states that besides having a crystal moss with a purity level only found in a 5-star dungeon, the young man seems like a strong hunter. Still in the conversation, they say the boy can remain hidden if he can explore the 5-star dungeons, and that the protagonist might be from a clan in a foreign country, but there's no reason for him to be interested in Korea. They ask what the person who negotiated the mosses is like, and if anyone went with her, but they affirm that with that amount of goods, a great feat was accomplished. Park questions how strong a person needs to be to collect that amount of crystal moss in a 5-star dungeon, concluding that Humu should have at least the level of captain. Music. He asks for help to investigate the boy and the assistant human. Quiso says to leave that to him. It is revealed that the boy talking to Park is Captain Lee Jed. A few days pass and the protagonist is training again in hell. On the 150th push-up, he drops from the bar. Humu says that if he weren't in hell, he would have done another 1,000, and that lifting a little already makes him tired. Lying on the ground, he wonders how long he has been there since returning to hell. They notify him that the next mission will start in 18 hours. Looking at the necklace, Hamu thinks that after going back and forth a few times, he is understanding better how it works. Reflectively, the protagonist thinks that the time spent living in hell will also pass in the real world, and that the remaining time of the mission will correspond to the time in the real world. Kong thinks the only problem is that his location always changes every time he returns from hell. He says he understands everything else, but that this is very complicated. Irritated, Humu asks why his location always changes. The boy falls to the ground and keeps murmuring that he doesn't understand. Again, the system appears and explains that the battle assistant optimizes accuracy by recording and controlling the movements of the skill user. Thoughtfully, Kong thinks that in a game, the assistant is like an illegal cheat or hack, and that getting a cheat like this means he cannot survive in hell without something like it. The battle skill has been activated. While training by throwing punches, Hayumu notices something strange in the environment. He says it seems like he is gradually aiming at a single point. The boy tries to strike again, but feels frustrated. Questioning himself, Kong asks if they remembered all his moves and altered them and what the assistant means. He finds the situation incredible. A new mission begins, this time called Friend of a Beginner. In doubt, Helma thinks about what the word beginner means. Kong says he is already at level 7 and shouldn't be receiving a beginner mission. He thinks about what was said about scarecrows and claims he hasn't seen any in the area. Knowing he needs to level up, he decides to start moving. The boy walks through hell, exploring until he sees a staircase. A bit scared, Humu says it feels like he's in a horror movie. Some scarecrows appear and stand face to face with the young man. Curious, he doesn't understand what those things are. Then he realizes they are the beginner-level scarecrows. Humu asks them to at least make the scarecrows look cool. Observing, he notices there are no levels on the opponents and concludes that they shouldn't suddenly gain experience. Not knowing what the opponents are, the young man thinks it won't hurt to throw the dart. He prepares to throw the object. After throwing, he hides behind a piece of wood, but the opponents don't move, leaving the boy in doubt if they are really just scarecrows. Due to the little action from the monsters, the boy believes the mission will be easy. When trying to punch, Kong is surprised. He says he is sure he hit the opponent with all his power, but it doesn't seem like he hit anything. Suddenly, the scarecrow's eyes turn red, and they claim to have completed the opponent's recognition and started sparring. Frightened, Kong realizes the opponents adjust to match his level and asks them to talk about the monsters before the battle, but thanks God that the opponents are slower than the goblins. Thoughtful, Haimu reflects that being level 7 in the real world is like being treated as a bodyguard or soldier with at least 5 years of experience. However, music. In hell, he is treated merely as a beginner. Irritated, he threatens the scarecrows and is informed that the battle assistant skill has been activated. In that situation, the protagonist would have to take down all those robots. Nervous, he prepares for the first attack. Suddenly, one of his opponents tries to approach with a punch. Noticing the danger, Kong Haimu pays attention to that movement and manages to dodge easily. Seeing a good opportunity, he counterattacks, hitting his enemy. However, he is captured by a robot trying to put him in a chokehold. With an elbow strike, he hits his opponent squarely, but he can't break free from the robot. In a quick motion, he turns his body and strikes the android's head. The metal begins to show defects as it gets dented. Confused, Kong Haimu wonders if the attack had worked as expected. At that moment, the robot recognizes the opponent and initiates level 2 sparring. While he remains distracted, the other enemies try to reach him. One of them manages to grab his hair with tremendous force. Another targets his arms, limiting the boy's movements. His legs are also the target of the effective attack. At that moment, he finds himself completely immobilized from any movement. Desperate, he asks the robots to let him go while noticing the opponent's approach. A punch lands on his face, causing immediate intense pain. The protagonist couldn't believe the situation he was in and would have to find a way to defend himself. Suddenly, His physical strength along with resistance to bleeding and pain begins to increase. The boy continues to take hits from the androids that seem to never end. Shortly after, his resistance drops below 10%, and he would be resurrected according to the advantages of the title The Strongest in Hell. Injured and with severe wounds, he tries to recover. However, he realizes it is already too late. His body was practically exhausted from so many attacks. Unable to land a single blow, he begins to doubt his strength and reflect on the possibility of fleeing. Even weak and unsteady, he gets up from the ground. Noticing that the opponents were using martial arts, he begins to release his energy. He wanted to use something effective to combat those enemies once and for all. Soon after, the energized baton appears in front of him. That hideous wood was strengthened, having a high attack power, but not very durable. Running music, he was determined to end that fight using his wooden baton. His eyes convey rage and determination to defeat any enemy. The robots were in combat position, ready for the threat. With a strike, he hits one of the opponents with all his strength. The result was a completely destroyed arm. Kong, who watches closely the damage caused. Upon being hit, the robot performs the opponent's recognition. In the blink of an eye, some kind of unknown weapon begins to emerge from the robot's body. Nervous, the protagonist, who was in a tight spot. Soon after, all the opponents had powerful weapons in their hands, and all were aimed at a single person, Kong Hongou. With a total survival duration of 5 days, the hero is defeated. Breathless and determined, he clenched his fists, ready to fight despite the evident fatigue. The brutal blow from the android came down with fury, and the young man barely had time to react. With a fierce shout, he channeled all his strength into a devastating and precise punch. Tying the robots to the wall might be a low blow, but there was no other way to defend himself. With the battle assistant functioning, he could end this in a one-on-one. Suddenly, he begins to release all the energy within his body. The environment transforms completely with a fully illuminated atmosphere. The next step would be to break the enemy's core. Music. As he approached the robot, the opponent's recognition was complete. The warning indicated that level 3 sparring had just begun. On top of the android, he delivered intense blows. As his opponent grew stronger, so did he. Tired, he seems to have lost count of how many times the mission failed. In the last one, he was attacked from behind and died at the hands of the robot. Once again, a precise kick hit his head, causing him to end up dead. Even a ring-style fighting move ended his life. Countless times in a row, he failed the same mission and ended up dead. The young man was already extremely irritated with that martial arts display that was destroying his body. He believed the robot knew numerous martial arts moves since it didn't repeat many of them. Suddenly, his opponent positions both feet on the ground and waits for the continuation of the fight. The two look at each other with determination, thinking about their next moves. Kong Huemu never thought he would die in a mano-a-mano fight, so he was confident about his victory. With a leap, he approaches the android, but his punch is definitely deflected with no tricks or gimmicks. Confused, he now finds himself in front of his opponent. He plants one foot on the ground to try to find some kind of balance. With a kick, he attempts to hit the robot's head. At that moment, the opponent's recognition was complete, initiating level 4 sparring. Happy, the protagonist realizes he has finally reached level 4. But before he could celebrate, his eyes are struck by the robot's metal fingers. As he opens his mouth to bite the boy, he screams in complete despair. His leg receives a crushing bite that is painful. Kong, who is terrified, watching that absurdity. The robot had completely destroyed his leg. In complete anguish, the young man begins to compare all that metal to a dog before dying again. At the end of his 9th attempt, Kong Humu realized 3 facts. First, the combat level ends at level 4, and so the patterns no longer vary or undergo changes. While fighting the robots, he was drawing new conclusions. Even tired and with sweat dripping down his face, he did not give up on any attempt. Second, the scarecrows have a fixed movement pattern. If there is any quirk, it will stop to correct its movement. By realizing these facts, he managed to defeat some of them along the way. His will to win was enormous and fatigue did not hinder him. Lastly, there was no need to destroy them since upon receiving a certain amount of damage, they would stop moving. In the end, there was no need to destroy them completely. The results that Humu achieved after realizing those 3 facts were enormous. Soon after, he managed to complete the sparring several times. In each fight, he acquired more skills and combat powers. The hero was determined to learn everything he could. Even knowing there was no need, he ended up destroying one of the scarecrows. If he kept destroying all of them, eventually that fight would stop. With all his energy, he launched intense blows against his enemies. At that moment, the warning showed again that he had completed the sparring. And shortly after, the beginner's friend mission was finally completed. Kong Hyunwoo's face showed fatigue and happiness for reaching that situation. All the scarecrows were down on the ground with no chance of getting up. Seeing that scene was truly something very satisfying for him. However, being extremely tired, he fell to the ground to catch his breath. The protagonist wanted to fight against things that were at the same level as him. So, he didn't even believe in the name of that mission. To him, it had no relation to being a beginner, being almost at the level of a teacher. It was more like they were beating their fighting techniques directly into the boy. Changing the subject, he decided to take a look at the rewards received. The quality of your rewards would increase due to the effect of the title Good Luck rank SSS. Without understanding anything, he receives a wrapping cloth. In his hands, that was the legendary Celestial Cradle, a cloth item that accelerates growth and fully restores any bodily damage. Happy and disappointed at the same time, the young man has no idea how to use that item. He starts to wonder if wrapping the cloth around his head would make him smarter. Unsure, he simply places the cloth around his head, but nothing happens. Embarrassed, he is thankful there are no spectators in the same environment. In the end, he believed the cloth wouldn't be of much use since the boy died and came back to life in perfect condition. Being a legendary item, he decides to sell the cloth and keep the money for himself. Looking in the system, he notices the egg acquired when he was dismantling the mosquitoes. Remembering the growth of the cloth, he wonders if it could work with that other item. Apparently, his new idea does not have the desired effect on the egg. Kong Hyunwoo assumes that the best course of action would be to sell the useless items. Suddenly, the egg begins to transform completely. Pieces fly everywhere, leaving the young man suspicious. Calmly, the eggshell starts to crack, but Kong Hyunwoo seems worried about encountering a cannibal monster hatchling. As he is dying of fear, the egg keeps breaking more and more. Suddenly, a bright light hits the protagonist's face. The energy is so powerful that it causes the egg to shatter into 1,000 pieces. From inside the egg comes a small and peculiar creature. A charming fairy was sleeping peacefully in a deep slumber. Confused, that was not exactly what the hero was expecting. Shortly after, her eyes begin to open slowly. The little fairy just came to life as soon as that egg hatched. Confused, the protagonist starts analyzing the strange creature in front of him. With his finger, he tries to poke her while affirming that the fairy was smaller than he imagined. But the creature is quicker and bites his finger with her tiny teeth. At that moment, the protagonist realizes that it is a cannibal monster. To him, that reward was worthless. Meanwhile, he hears the fairy's whimpers, which seemed hungry. With a sad look, she laments the fact that she is hungry. Watching that scene, the hero knew he had to help her. He takes a candy from his pocket and hands it to the fairy, but she immediately refuses without a second thought. Suddenly, the creature points at the protagonist, who looks extremely confused. Apparently, the fairy was interested in him. In the end, it really was a cannibal monster, trying to find a way to satisfy her hunger. He offers a bit of his blood. The fairy would control the bleeding as soon as her hunger was satisfied. To the boy, that whole scene was extremely disgusting, but he couldn't complain since he got the egg by demonstrating the mosquitoes. Besides, that fairy looked like a mosquito, possibly a mosquito fairy. Happy, the creature claims that it was a very satisfying meal, but was eager for dessert. Irritated, Kong Hyunwoo can't believe the audacity of that monster. Retracting her words, she thanks him for the meal from her butler. Releasing the little one, he questions her name. However, the fairy starts to strain her memory as much as she can. Suddenly, she realizes she can't remember her own name. Even so, She knew she was not any kind of mosquito fairy and firmly denied it. Shortly after, she manages to remember what she is called. She was the fairy that was supposedly to appear at the end of times with the goal of eating all living things when the world ended. Confused, the protagonist doesn't understand her dark intentions behind such a delicate creature. At that moment, his only thought was whether or not to kill the fairy. Embarrassed, the little flying creature says she promised to eat all living things when the world ended. While observing, the protagonist doesn't believe she could eat everything. Upon reflection, he thinks that his blood is poisonous, so potent that it would melt a goblin's hands. Even after ingesting his blood, the creature appeared to be perfectly fine. Touching her, he becomes curious to know what her abilities or level are. After a while, he realizes he could get rid of her by domesticating her and using her as a pet. Confused, he tries to understand the intentions of that creature. From that moment on, he would call her Renian, and the chosen name pleases her. In the fairy language, it sounded similar to an agent of the apocalypse. The protagonist is left speechless after hearing that. In the end, he asks her to make just one promise. He demands that she never eat a human, and if she were very close to dying of hunger, she should eat someone else who wasn't him. In exchange, he would give a little more blood. While the fairy celebrates the new meal, he thinks it would be good if her diet were a bit unbalanced. The two observe something beside them. It was something like a glorious battlefield of the victors. Reflecting a bit, the young man watches the scene attentively. He notes that one of them is split in half, causing strange and concern. He can't believe he could have done that so brutally. The system opens before him, showing an alarming and intriguing notice. The brave energy has been added to the battle assistant. I can see those words. He thinks about the additional trait, lifting one of the robots. He tries to balance it. He decided to stop thinking and put everything into practice immediately, without hesitation. Quickly, he decided to test his new ability with renewed confidence. With a powerful punch, he strikes the dummy, feeling the force vibrate. I was impressed with the size of my current and undeniable strength. Even Rainian was amazed by the powers I displayed. Determined to try as well, she begins to beat the robot with determination. At that moment, they hear a warning about opponent recognition. Suddenly, all the fallen robots on the ground begin to rise. Prepared for battle, the protagonist already positions himself in place. With one step after another, they start walking in his direction. He was identified as a superhuman and the lock was deactivated. Not understanding what was happening, he just observed around him. He didn't understand what it meant to be superhuman. Pointing to his left, the robot shows him something. The young man begins to carefully remove the junk one by one. Renian smells a very fragrant scent that intrigues her deeply. With curiosity and attention, she points in the direction from which the aroma was coming. Removing a table from the front, he finds a human skeleton. To the fairy, the smell was very pleasant. Picking up its bones, she begins to gnaw on them, screaming. Her boss said she couldn't eat dead people either. Noticing her hand, she sees the presence of a letter. Upon opening it, she starts to read everything that was written in it. The writing stated that 3 years had passed since the nightmare level, and the children born in the toxic era had died. The users of abilities also couldn't withstand it and began to die. Hope continues to dwindle and humanity was heading towards extinction. Immediately, the protagonist doesn't take those words very seriously. According to that letter and the message he saw when he entered that place, it was about the future of the world he had seen. The letter mentioned the death of Father Johann and Professor Park Hyos. However, it was not signed, so he couldn't know who wrote it. Upon finding a returned stone, the fairy asks if she could eat. The protagonist begins to reflect on the potential of the skeleton. He asks Renee to hand over that object. Upon touching the stone, a light begins to fill the entire space. Desperate, they don't understand what was happening. His hand was stuck to that stone. Unable to let go, the young man remained with his hand frozen until the stone shattered into several pieces. Desperate, the boy began to feel an intense pain. Looking at the palm of his hand, he noticed something truly strange and disturbing. In an inexplicable way, the design of the stone had been transferred to his skin. A warning shows that the stars were watching him. Suddenly, everything begins to change. Around, saying goodbye to the friend he called Butler, Renan leaves, asking him to survive and return on his own. While he, gripped by a supernatural force, becomes increasingly desperate. Suddenly, he finds himself in the middle of the universe. Extensive stars surround him. Confused, he doesn't understand anything that was happening. Walking through space, he tries to call for the ferry. Another warning shows that the advanced star, Beryl, recognized the absorption of the star fragment. Beryl was disappointed with the values he had defended until then. So he took the fragment and decided to leave in search of answers. Now scared, he begins to joke about the possibility of dying. He couldn't believe a star could be disappointed in him. Suddenly, a warning shows that the lock has been opened. The owners of the stars are beings who have absolute dominion over their own territory somewhere in space. These beings place their absolute power in fragments and lend them. They do this in the hope that their kin will use this power to become rulers and expand their territories. The user Kong Hyumu is in possession of one of those fragments. Thus, they wish to see one of their kin. His eyes widen as he connects all the dots. The stone found by Renan was not a stone of return, but one of the fragments of stars. Listening to a strange sound, he pays more attention to his surroundings. Looking up, he sees something with an intense bright light. The colors begin to interlace and all approach the protagonist. The star whispers, Monstral is in search of its charm that will deceive everyone. The conquering star Arden is offering him command of an army of fire and steel. The hungry star Yogol Lamb is telling him to follow it in the search for the snake that completely swallowed the previous world. The brittle star Galas is offering a world behind a screen for him to govern. The green lamenting star is predicting his dominion over all things that have passed. Those beings were waiting to invest in the boy after seeing his abilities. Thus, he should choose a star to proceed. Furious, he says it is necessary to know at least some things about the stars before choosing. The brittle star Galas is an absolute ruler who laughs behind a plot he planned, acting secretly in the shadows. The green lamenting star is the father of all pain and melancholy, commanding an army of the dead and watching despair. The hungry star Yogol Lame is a snake of greed and desire that wishes to swallow everything in this world. The whispering star Monstral is the one that instigates in the light and deceives in the dark, able to fool any powerful being. The conquering star Arden is a loser who advances with fire and kills his enemies with steel, burning the world with hatred. Noticing a certain resemblance, he asks if they all had some personality disorder. According to the system, the stars are interested in those who are similar to them.